Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, everyone, get ready because today we're taking a really serious plunge into planning a trip to Europe.
We really are. We've got quite a stack of sources here.
Yeah, everything from like the nitty-gritty travel logistics, the practical stuff, but also the really rich history you find in castles and museums. We're going to try and pull out the best bits for you.
It's a fascinating mix, actually. There's some real practical gold dust here on, managing costs, getting around, staying safe. And that's sitting right alongside these really interesting looks at the architecture, the stories behind like ancient castles, and even some super modern museums.
Yeah.
Plus, a little peek at where other travelers seem to be going.
So our mission really is to go beyond just like a list of tips.
Yeah.
We want to connect the dots for you, maybe highlight the why behind some of the advice,
Yeah.
and help you feel genuinely prepared but also excited for a European adventure. Understanding both the practical side and, well, those incredible layers of history and culture.
And it's worth noting up front, one of the sources does come from a North American perspective that points out some differences you might notice.
Okay.
But the great thing is, while Europe is just incredibly diverse, I mean, every country, every city feels unique. So many of these insights really are universal. It's just about smart travel, really, no matter where you're from or where you end up going on the continent.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Starting with the absolute basics, the foundations of planning. Timing and money, the big two, right?
Right. And the sources are pretty clear on this. Timing your visit can make a huge difference to your experience and definitely to your wallet.
So avoid the big holidays, Easter, Christmas.
Generally, yeah, that makes sense. Fewer crowds, often cheaper. But there's a nuance, like with special events.
Right.
Christmas markets, for example, they're a huge
Oh,
draw.
people want to see those.
Exactly. So the tip there is maybe aim for late November. You
Yeah.
still get that magical feeling, the atmosphere.
But maybe fewer elbows in your ribs.
Potentially, yeah. Significantly fewer people than, say, the week right before Christmas. It's that kind of strategic timing they're talking
That
about.
makes a lot of sense. And let's be honest, Europe can be expensive. So how do the sources suggest, getting a handle on the financial side?
They really focus on smart money management right from the start. It's not just budgeting, but also thinking about things like travel credit cards.
Ah, the points game.
Yeah, exactly. Using something like the Amex Platinum is mentioned specifically, big sign-up points that could potentially cover flights. Plus, you get perks like travel credits, insurance, lounge access. It's about making your regular spending kind of work towards your trip.
Turning groceries into flights, basically. I like it. Okay, now logistically, if you're planning on hopping between countries, you really need to understand the Schengen zone.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Yeah. Think of it like this huge area, loads of European countries, where you can travel between them without the usual passport control at every single border.
So you just walk across
Yeah.
or take a train.
Pretty much, yeah. The big thing for tourists is the time limit. Generally, it's 90 days within the zone during any 180-day period.
Okay, 90 days in, 90 days out, roughly.
Kind of, yeah. And if you travel outside the Schengen zone, say, you pop over to the UK or Ireland, then you're back to regular border checks, passports, and all that.
Got it. Freedom within the zone, but for a limited time. Okay, so you figured out when you're going, you understand the border stuff. Where are you going to sleep?
Accommodation. The next big piece. And the advice is super consistent here. Book early.
Even if it's not peak season.
Yeah, even then. Because you never know. Some local festival or event could pop up and suddenly prices shoot up. Platforms like Booking.com get mentioned because they often have free reservation and cancellation options.
Oh, that's handy. It gives you flexibility.
Exactly. If your plans change, you're not locked in necessarily.
But it's not just hotels and hostels, is it? The sources talk about some other ways to find a place to stay, more creative ways.
Yeah, definitely thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Things like couch surfing, where locals host you for free, or house swap, literally trading homes with someone.
Wow.
Then there's house and pet sitting, using sites like Trusted House Sitters, where you stay for free, basically, in exchange for looking after someone's home and pets.
Okay, that's interesting.
And also, Workaway. That connects you with hosts where you might do some volunteering, maybe a few hours a day, in exchange for your accommodation.
So these aren't just about saving money then?
Not at all. I mean, that's a huge perk. But they can offer really unique ways to, like, immerse yourself in the local culture. Much more than just staying in a standard hotel.
Okay, planning's underway. Maybe you've booked somewhere to stay. How do you actually get to Europe? And then crucially, how do you get around once you're there?
Right. So getting to Europe, well, the basic advice is hunt for those cheap flights, obviously. But there are tricks.
Like what
One really clever one mentioned is taking advantage of free stopovers. Some European airlines, if you have a long layover anyway, they might let you extend it for a day or two, sometimes for free or just a tiny fee.
Oh, wow. So you could see, like, Reykjavik on the way to Paris or something.
Potentially, yeah. It's basically getting a little bonus city for the price of one flight. Worth looking into which airlines offer that.
That's a fantastic tip. Okay, so you've landed. Now, getting around within Europe, the whole philosophy seems quite different from, say, North America.
Oh, completely different. The emphasis is massively on public transport. Trains, buses, trams.
Hmm.
Especially in and between cities, it's often so good that renting a car is just totally unnecessary for a lot of trips.
And the sources actually seem to warn against car rentals unless you really need one.
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you're going somewhere really remote, maybe.
Yeah.
They point out all the hidden costs, not just the rental fee itself, but things like needing special highway stickers, vignettes, they call them.
Vignettes.
Yeah, like in Switzerland, you often have to buy this sticker before you even drive into the country. Plus, just the stress, navigating old city centers, finding parking, dealing with traffic. It can really eat into your enjoyment.
Right. Public transport sounds way less stressful.
Generally, yes. It's presented as the default, easy option.
Okay, trains. They feel like such a core European experience. What about your rail passes? Are they always the best deal?
Not always, no. That's a key caution in the sources. Passes give you flexibility, which is great if you're spontaneous.
Hmm.
But if your itinerary is pretty fixed, booking individual train tickets, especially for high-speed routes, well in advance can often work out cheaper.
So do your homework. Compare the pass price to individual tickets.
Exactly. Research is key. But that said, the sources definitely acknowledge the appeal. Just sitting back, watching the scenery roll by on a train,
Hmm.
it's part of the experience itself sometimes.
For sure. And what if you're really trying to stretch your budget between countries?
Then you're looking at budget airlines.
Yep.
Ryanair, EasyJet,
Yeah.
Wizz Air,
Hmm.
the names come up. They offer incredibly low fares sometimes, like ridiculously cheap.
What's the catch? There's always a catch.
Well,
Yeah.
the experience can be basic.
Yeah.
Customer support might be limited. And they make their money on add-ons. Luggage fees, seat selection fees, paying for a drink. It all adds up.
Right. And buses.
Buses like Flixbus get mentioned too. Another budget-friendly option, often very flexible routes, but they usually take longer than the train. Pros and cons for each.
Okay. Arriving in a new city, airport, or maybe a big, chaotic train station, that can be overwhelming.
Oh, definitely. Especially if you're tired from traveling, got lots of luggage, maybe you're with kids.
Yeah.
The sources suggest considering pre-booking an airport transfer. Services like welcome pickups are mentioned.
Why them specifically?
Well, they offer set prices, so no surprise meter running up. The drivers track your flight, so they know if you're delayed. They usually speak English. And often free cancellation if plans change. It just takes away that immediate stress of figuring out transport or worrying about taxi scams right off the bat.
That sounds worth considering, actually. Okay, once you're settled, navigating the local city transport, any key tips there?
Yeah, do a little homework before you arrive.
Mhm.
Just understanding the basics of how the local system works. Where do you find the platform? Do trains have different sections? And critically, how do you validate your ticket? Because you often have to.
Validate, like stamp it in a machine.
Often, yeah. Or tap in somewhere. Big train stations especially can be confusing, so knowing the basics really helps.
Good tip. And what if you, say, arrive too early for your hotel check-in? Or have time to kill after checking out?
Train station lockers. Or sometimes they have manned left luggage offices. Absolute lifesavers. You could just securely store your bags for a few hours or even the whole day.
Frees you up to explore without dragging suitcases everywhere?
Exactly. Makes a huge difference.
What about taxis or ride shares within the city, especially in places known for taxi scams?
Using apps is highly recommended there. Uber or Free Now is another one common in Europe. The apps give you price estimates up front, track the journey, handle payment. It just adds a layer of transparency and can stop you getting ripped off compared to just hailing a random cab off the street.
Makes sense. And look for deals on public transport tickets too, right?
Absolutely.
Mm.
Most cities will have day passes or maybe group tickets if you're traveling together,
Mhm.
or bundles like Barcelona's T10 ticket was mentioned as an example, a multi-trip card that saves money. Worth checking the options.
And you mentioned validating tickets earlier. Seems important.
Yes. It's a small detail, but tourists often get caught out. If the system requires validation, stamping it, tapping it, you must do it,
Yeah.
and then keep the ticket until you've finished your journey and exited the station or system. because random checks by inspectors are common. And the fines, if you don't have a validated ticket or can't produce it, can be really steep. Paris is mentioned as being particularly strict about this.
Okay, good warning. Finally, for just zipping around a city quickly.
Renting bikes or electric scooters through apps has become super popular in lots of major cities. They're usually quick, relatively cheap, and honestly can be a really fun way to see things and cover shorter distances.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. You're on the ground, you're moving around. Let's talk about navigating safety, culture, and of course, food. Safety first, it's a big concern for a lot of travelers.
It is, and the sources handle this well, I think. They give you a realistic picture without trying to scare you. Petty theft, scams, they are more common in really touristy areas, especially big cities like Paris, Barcelona, Rome.
Pickpockets.
Pickpockets are definitely the main thing mentioned. They target crowded places, train stations, busy metro lines, popular attractions where people are distracted.
So it's not about avoiding those places entirely because you want to see them.
Exactly. It's about being smart while you're there. Awareness, not fear. That's the key message. Keep an eye on your bags, your pockets. Be mindful of who's getting really close to you in a crowd. Don't leave your phone sticking out of your back pocket. Basic stuff, but important.
The sources mention specific gear too, like anti-theft bags.
Yeah, things like PackSafe products or scarves with hidden passport pockets. They're options. And also, doing a quick search before you go for pickpocket hot zones in your destination city.
Ah, so knowing which specific station or bus route is notorious.
Right. Knowing that, say, Terni Station in Rome or Bus 64, there are hotspots, just helps you be extra vigilant in those specific locations.
Okay. And what about those classic street scams, like someone trying to give you something for free?
Oh, yeah, they're still around.
Yeah.
The friendship bracelet scam, someone ties it on your wrist, then demands money. Or someone hands you a rose, same deal. Or the petition scam.
What's that?
Someone asks you to sign a petition, often for a seemingly good cause, but it's just a distraction while their accomplice tries to pick your pocket.
Wow. So how do you handle these?
The advice in the sources is actually quite blunt. Often, the most effective way to deal with persistent scammers is just be rude.
Really?
Yeah. Ignore them completely. No eye contact. Just walk away firmly. They're looking for engagement, for you to hesitate. If you give them nothing, you become a much less appealing target.
Okay, noted. Ignore and walk. What about practical money safety?
Don't carry huge amounts of cash. Just enough for the day, an amount you could technically afford to lose if the worst happened. And crucially, store backup cards like a debit card and a credit card separately from your main wallet or purse.
So if one gets stolen, you're not completely stuck.
Exactly. You still have access to funds.
And generally making yourself less attractive to thieves.
Avoid being too flashy. Don't leave your expensive phone sitting out on a cafe table. Don't hang designer shopping bags off the back of your chair. Be especially careful with your phone near metro doors or even bike lanes in busy cities.
Phone snatching.
Yeah, it's a known thing. Someone on a bike or scooter might grab it right out of your hand as the train doors are closing or as you're walking near the curb. London was mentioned for this.
And watch out for those bike lanes yourself.
Oh, definitely. That's a different kind of safety tip, but a good one. If you're not used to dedicated bike lanes, it's easy to accidentally step into one without looking. You don't want to cause an accident.
Okay. Any other scams to be particularly aware of?
There's one mentioned, especially in cities with a big party scene. Strangers being overly friendly, maybe inviting you for a drink at a place nearby.
Sounds potentially nice.
Yeah.
Or suspicious.
Right. The scam is you go along, have a drink, and then get presented with an absolutely outrageous, extortionate bill.
Ouch! So the lesson is?
Trust your gut. If someone seems way too friendly out of the blue or an invitation feels off, just politely decline and move on.
Simple physical things, like locks on bags.
Yeah, putting small locks on the zippers of your backpack or bag, especially in crowded spots like the metro, can be a good visual deterrent. Makes it harder for casual pickpockets.
And taxis again, especially from airports or stations.
Yeah, research common fares beforehand if you do need to take a taxi. Prague and Sofia were mentioned as places where tourists sometimes get seriously overcharged if they don't have a clue what the price should be. Again, using apps like Uber or FreeNow helps avoid this.
What about getting cash out, ATMs?
Stick to ATMs that are physically attached to a bank, preferably during banking hours. Avoid those standalone non-bank ATMs you sometimes see in tourist areas or shops. Euronet is a common brand mentioned. They often have terrible exchange rates and really high fees.
Good to know. And finally, on safety, the sources suggest having a worst-case scenario plan.
Yeah, just mentally prepping. What would you do if your passport was stolen? Or your phone? Or your wallet? Knowing who you need to contact, maybe having copies of important documents stored securely elsewhere, it just helps reduce panic and stress if something bad does happen. Makes it more manageable.
Okay, that's a lot on safety, but really important. Moving to something less stressful, staying connected digitally.
Right. For longer trips especially, getting a good VPN, a virtual private network, is recommended.
Why is that?
It adds a layer of online privacy and security, particularly if you're using public Wi-Fi networks in cafes or hotels, which aren't always secure. Plus, it can help you access websites or streaming services from your home country that might be geo-blocked in Europe, like your online banking site sometimes.
Ah, okay. Any specific advice on VPNs?
Just choose a reputable paid service. The sources warn against using free VPNs as they can sometimes have security risks of their own or sell your data.
Got it. Okay, now, the really fun part, food and drink.
Yes. And the first tip is do a little research on regional specialties. Don't just assume Italian food is pizza and pasta everywhere.
Right, it varies massively by region.
Exactly. Same in France, Spain, Germany.
Mm.
Finding out what's local, what's in season, will lead you to much better, more authentic meals.
And that classic travel advice about avoiding restaurants right next to the biggest tourist attractions, still true.
Oh, absolutely still relevant. They often rely on location, not quality, and can be overpriced with mediocre food. The advice is simple. Just walk a block or two away from the main square or monument. You'll often find better food at better prices.
How can you spot a potential tourist trap restaurant? Any red flags?
Yeah, the sources list a few. Big laminated menus with pictures of the food, menus translated into like 5 different languages, maybe with a specific section labeled tourist menu,
Uh-oh.
and maybe aggressive touts outside trying really hard to pull you in off the street. Those can all be warning signs.
And checking prices seems critical too.
Absolutely crucial. Always double check that prices for everything, especially drinks or daily specials, are clearly displayed before you order.
Why the emphasis?
Because there are these horror stories, sometimes they go viral, of tourists getting hit with absolutely astronomical bills because the price for, say, a particular fish or a cocktail wasn't clearly listed beforehand.
Yikes. Okay, check the menu carefully. Any other quick checks?
A quick scan of recent Google Maps reviews can be telling. If you see a pattern of people complaining about scams or crazy prices, probably best to avoid it.
Good idea. What about trying nicer, maybe more expensive restaurants without totally blowing the budget?
Lunch specials. That's the pro tip. Lots of great restaurants offer set lunch menus, prefix, during the week that are way cheaper than ordering a la carte or going for dinner. It's a fantastic way to experience higher-end places more affordably.
Nice one. And there's a big cultural difference around getting the bill, isn't there?
Yes, this confuses a lot of North Americans.
Yeah.
In most of Europe, the server will not automatically bring you the bill when you finish eating. It's considered rude, like they're rushing you out.
So you have to ask for it.
You have to explicitly ask for it. You know, il conto per favor in Italy, or l'addition s'il vous plaît in France. Or just catch their eye and make the little signing gesture. But don't sit there waiting for it to appear magically.
Okay, good to know. What about other food experiences, beyond just restaurants?
Food tours get a big thumbs up. A great way to get oriented quickly, learn about local ingredients and dishes, and sample a bunch of things. Cooking classes are also mentioned as a fun, hands-on way to engage with the cuisine.
And ordering water. Sounds simple, but
Yeah. Get used to sparkling water potentially being the default if you just ask for water. In Italy, it's acqua frizzante. If you want plain flat water, you need to specifically ask for still water, or acqua naturale.
okay, still water it is for me. Any final money-saving food tips?
Skip the often overpriced hotel breakfast. Instead, pop into a local bakery for delicious pastries and coffee. It's usually cheaper, tastier, and a more authentic local experience.
Excellent. Okay, moving beyond food to broader culture and etiquette. The big message seems to be, Europe is not one single culture.
That's maybe the most important takeaway here. You absolutely have to do a little research on the specific norms for the countries you're visiting. Tipping customs vary wildly, queuing how people line up or don't. Meal times can be very different, even acceptable noise levels in public.
It all changes from place to place.
Significantly.
But some basic courtesy is universal.
Oh, definitely. Learning just a couple of basic phrases, hello, thank you, please, in the local language is always appreciated. It's just good manners and shows respect.
And tipping, what's the general rule? If there is one.
The general rule is that it's much, much lower than in North America. Often, Just rounding up the bill or leaving a few extra coins for good service is plenty. Service is often included in the price. Definitely research the specific country, but resist that North American urge to leave 15–20% automatically.
Okay. What about speaking volume?
This comes up. North Americans, particularly, can sometimes be perceived as quite loud in public spaces compared to locals. Just try to be mindful of your volume, especially on quiet public transport or in restaurants. Match the level around you.
And if you're unsure about how to behave in a certain situation.
Observe the locals. That's the easiest way. How are they acting on the train? How are they ordering coffee? How are they queuing? Just watch and try to mimic them. It helps you blend in and avoid unintentionally disrespecting local customs.
Makes sense. And for getting a real taste of local culture beyond the usual tourist sites.
Look into local festivals or folk events happening while you're there. The sources mention some amazing examples. Huge wine festivals like Germany's Wurstmarkt, obviously Oktoberfest and Starkbierfest for beer lovers, vibrant celebrations like Cologne Carnival, or the incredible flower displays at Keukenhof in the Netherlands. These offer a fantastic window into local traditions and life.
All right, let's pivot now. We've covered a ton of the practicalities, the cultural stuff. Let's
Yeah.
dive into the history and the incredible architecture that really defines so much of Europe. Castles and palaces, they seem like a good starting point.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so much more than just, old stone buildings.
Yeah.
They really trace how power, society, and even architecture itself evolved over hundreds, even thousands of years.
They weren't always just defensive forts, right?
No, not at all. They started that way, often. But they evolved into grand homes, centers of government, powerful symbols of wealth and control.
Looking at the examples mentioned in the sources, you can kind of see that evolution playing out.
Exactly. You start way back with something like Swords Castle in Ireland in the 1200s. That was more like a fortified home for the archbishop right after the Viking period. So security was key, but it was tied to religious authority.
Then you jump to the 1300s, Heidelberg Castle in Germany. That sounds like a mix.
Yeah, a real blend of fortress and fancy residence. And its history is fascinating. It saw wars fell into ruin, and then later in the Romantic era, people started seeing beauty in the ruins and parts were rebuilt. It shows how our perception of these places changes too.
Okay, then there's the Doge's Palace in Venice around 1340. That was purely government, wasn't it?
Well, it was the absolute heart of the Venetian Republic's government, and it was the Doge's official residence, so both. Its history is tied to Venice's fortune, survived fires, rebuilt, and now it's this incredible museum. You can almost feel the history, the power, even links to things like Venice's famous masquerade masks.
Moving forward again, Kronborg Castle in Denmark, 1574, Hamlet's Castle.
That's the one. But historically, its location was everything. Right on the Sound, this narrow strait. It was built to control that passageway and tax ships for about 400 years. A prime example of strategic location, driving architecture, and influencing history.
Jump to the 1700s, the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, Russia. That sounds like pure imperial power.
Oh, absolutely. A gigantic, opulent official residence for the czars. And its history reflects Russia's upheavals damaged by fire, rebuilt, and then famously stormed during the 1917 revolution. Now it's a core part of the Hermitage Museum.
One of the biggest museums in the world.
Exactly. Showing that transition from a private royal space to a public treasure.
Now, Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany, that feels different. Built much later, 1868 onwards.
Totally different purpose. This wasn't about defense or governing. This was King Ludwig II's personal fantasy retreat. Pure romanticism. The architecture's theatrical, almost like a stage set.
With an interior grotto.
Yeah, and rooms decorated with scenes from Wagner's operas. It's all about personal vision, art, escapism, not practicality. A real shift in why you'd build a castle.
And then you have Buckingham Palace in London. Started smaller in 1703, but became the main royal residence later.
Right, from Queen Victoria onwards, 1837. It's evolved into this working palace, administrative headquarters, place for state events, still the monarch's home. It's constantly adapting, but still holds that tradition. There's even a fun fact about the queen and her sister being girl guides there.
Aha, really? Okay. And Zarzuela Palace in Spain.
Originally a 17th century hunting lodge, shows how buildings change function. It was adapted later and became the main residence for the Spanish monarchs from 1962 with King Juan Carlos and now King Felipe, from leisure lodge to official royal home.
It's really striking how many of these iconic places, Doge's Palace, Kronborg, Winter Palace, Neuschwanstein, Buckingham, Zarzuela, are in those top visited countries we saw mentioned earlier: Italy, Denmark, Russia, Germany, UK, Spain.
Absolutely. These structures aren't just background scenery. They're deeply woven into the national identity and a huge part of the draw for visitors. They literally are the foundations of so much European history.
Their evolution tells such a story. Okay, speaking of structures telling stories, let's talk about museums. Not just as places containing art and history, but as architectural statements in their own right.
This is a really interesting angle from the sources. How European museums often inhabit buildings that were originally something totally different. Palaces, like the Louvre or the Hermitage, but also power stations, train stations.
Adaptive reuse, they call it.
Exactly. It's maybe more common than in, say, the U.S., where many major museums were purpose-built from the start. This reuse adds incredible layers of history and character to the museum experience itself.
The Louvre in Paris is maybe the ultimate example. Fortress, palace, now museum.
Right, centuries of transformation.
Right.
And then you get that bold modern intervention IMP's glass pyramid in the 80s. Hugely controversial at the time.
I remember.
But it really worked, didn't it? Dramatically improved how people enter and move through the vast complex and created this iconic visual contrast between old and new. It symbolizes how museums have to evolve.
The British Museum in London also mixes old and new pretty dramatically, right? With that covered courtyard.
The Great Court, yeah. The museum itself is this grand 19th century neoclassical building. But in 2000, they put that amazing glass roof, designed by Foster Plus Partners, over the central courtyard. It totally transformed the space into this bright, covered public square, made it easier to navigate, a place to meet, a real hub. It's clever modern architecture enhancing a historic building.
Now, the Centre Pompidou in Paris, that's something else entirely. It looks like it's inside out.
Huh, yeah, that's the classic description. Piano and Rogers design from the 70s. All the pipes, ducts, escalators, the structural frame itself are on the outside, painted in bright colors. It was radical, challenging the whole idea of a museum as this closed-off monumental box. It freed up the interior space for flexible galleries and created this really vibrant, interactive public space outside, with the escalators giving amazing views over Paris. Very form follows function, but in a playful, boundary-pushing way. Sometimes called deconstructivist, though maybe not strictly by the book definition, it definitely broke norms.
And the Tate Modern in London, another example of reusing an industrial building.
Prime example. It's housed in the former Bankside Power Station. Herzog and de Meuron, the architects, kept so much of that industrial character, the huge chimney, the vast turbine hall where the generators used to be, the exposed brick and steel.
Gives it a certain feel, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A kind of raw urban energy that feels perfect for a museum focused on modern and contemporary art. The turbine hall itself is this incredible space for massive installations.
Okay, then there's the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. The building itself almost became more famous than the art inside for a while.
It really did. Frank Gehry's design, those swirling curved forms covered in titanium. It looks almost like a sculpture or a ship run aground on the riverbank. It's pure spectacle.
And it had a huge impact on the city, right? The Bilbao effect.
Exactly. Bilbao was a declining industrial city. This wildly ambitious, instantly iconic museum put it back on the map, drove tourism, and sparked wider regeneration. It showed how architecture itself could be an economic catalyst. It's a key example of deconstructivism in action.
Back in Paris, the Musée d'Orsay is another conversion story. Used to be a train station.
A stunning one, yeah. A Beaux-Arts railway station built for the 1900 World's Fair. It was saved from demolition and brilliantly converted into an art museum in the 1980s. They preserved so much of the original architecture, the huge arched roof, the giant clocks, the ironwork.
So the building itself connects to the art.
Perfectly. It houses art mainly from the period when the station was built, 1848 to 1914. So the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist masterpieces feel right at home under that magnificent 19th century structure. It's a beautiful marriage of art, history, and architecture.
And one more example, MPA in Barcelona, the Contemporary Art Museum there. What's its architectural style?
Very different again. Designed by Richard Meyer, it's all about clean white lines, geometric forms, lots of glass, very minimalist, bright, open spaces inside.
Creates a certain atmosphere for the art?
Yeah, the idea is that the architecture fosters contemplation, allows for fluid movement, and doesn't compete with the contemporary art, but rather provides a clean, neutral backdrop for it.
It's also interesting how the sources mention these modern museums thinking about sustainability and the visitor experience in their design.
Definitely. Things like energy efficiency,
Yeah.
using natural light smartly, recycled materials, maybe solar panels or rainwater harvesting, it's becoming much more common.
And the architecture enhancing the visit itself.
Right. like the Pompidou's external escalators giving you those Paris views,
Hmm.
or the Tate's huge turbine hall, allowing for art you couldn't show elsewhere, the British Museum's Great Court being a central meeting point, the Guggenheim's dynamic shapes encouraging you to explore, or MacBA's open layout feeling very accessible. The building becomes part of the experience.
And again, these major museums, Louvre or Pompidou, Orsay in France, British Museum, Tate Modern in the UK, Guggenheim, MacBA in Spain, huge draws in those popular countries. And Italy, of course, with the Capitoline Museums mentioned as having the oldest public collection in the world, shows how deep the museum tradition runs in Europe.
Wow, okay, looking at this whole huge picture from figuring out train tickets and avoiding scams, all the way to appreciating how a medieval castle evolved or why a modern museum looks the way it does, it's so clear that Europe offers this incredible mix, the ancient right alongside the modern.
It really does. That blend is what makes it so fascinating. And understanding a bit of that context, both practical and historical, just makes the whole trip richer. We should probably touch on a few final quick hit tips from the sources just to round things out.
Good idea. Like being mentally prepared for scaffolding. Famous old landmarks are always being restored somewhere. Think the Trevi Fountain covered up for months. It happens.
Yeah, manage expectations. Also, prioritize free museums or sites. Many have free admission days or times, or large parts of their collections are always free. Worth checking.
And for the really popular attractions, book tickets online, well in advance. Skip the line passes often seem expensive, but can save you hours of queuing time. Totally worth it sometimes.
What about avoiding crowds within the attractions?
Try visiting right before closing time, often much quieter. Or look for special before or after hours tours some places offer. More expensive maybe, but a totally different experience. And don't just stick to the main tourist trail. Seek out unique tours, maybe neighborhood walks, or check local blogs for tips on hidden gems or alternative viewpoints for photos away from the selfie stick hordes.
Ah, the crowdless photo hack. The sources mention using the iPhone Live Photo long exposure trick for that.
Yeah. If you take a live photo of a scene with moving people, you can then apply the long exposure effect, and it often magically erases the moving crowds, leaving just the static background. Clever trick.
Okay, packing. Quick hits on packing.
Comfortable walking shoes. Non-negotiable. You will walk miles. And seriously, do not bring suitcases. You can't easily lift and carry yourself up flights of stairs. Elevators are not guaranteed, especially in older buildings or smaller hotels.
Good point. What else?
Consider air tags or similar trackers for your luggage. Peace of mind. Pack an emergency change of clothes in your carry-on, just in case your checked bag goes astray.
Money belts. Yes or no?
The sources lean towards using hidden pockets inside your clothes or bags, rather than obvious, bulky money belts, which can sometimes signal tourist with valuables anyway.
Universal adapter essential. Packing cubes for organization.
Yep, lots of people swear by packing cubes. Also, pack a reusable shopping bag, or too many places charge for plastic bags now. And consider making your own travel-sized toiletries in reusable containers, rather than buying expensive minis. Better for the planet, often cheaper.
Okay, almost there. Any final fun, quirky tips?
Yeah, a couple of little things like be prepared to figure out how to weigh your own fruit and veg at the supermarket. It's a common system in Europe. You weigh it, print a sticker, then take it to the checkout. There was a funny story about tomatoes.
Huh. Okay. Also, using Google Maps to star or save places you read about or want to visit.
Great for planning. You see them all on the map, helps build your itinerary visually. Another one. If you need customer service from an airline or train company, sometimes sending a message via Twitter gets a faster response than calling.
Interesting. And binging movies set in your destination beforehand.
Yeah, fun way to get excited. See places you'll soon be walking around. Builds anticipation.
And one very specific tip for certain countries.
Right. If you're traveling to places that use the Cyrillic alphabet, like Bulgaria, Serbia, Russia, Ukraine, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Belarus, taking even just an hour to learn the basic letters can be incredibly helpful for reading signs, menus, station names that might not be in Latin script.
That's a really practical one. Ultimately, though, one source kind of brought it back to the core feeling that travel in Europe shouldn't just be about frantically ticking off sites.
Exactly. It's more about slowing down a bit, savoring the experience, being present, soaking in the atmosphere, the differences, the history.
Which kind of leads to a final thought, maybe, for you listening.
Yeah, maybe something to ponder. When you think about Europe's incredibly deep history, side by side with its really diverse, vibrant present, How does understanding the evolution of its buildings, from those ancient castles built for war to these modern museums designed for public experience, even for sustainability, how does that understanding change the way you might approach actually visiting and experiencing the continent today?
That's a great question to leave people with, something to mull over.
Indeed. Makes you think differently about what you're seeing.
Well, that really was a deep dive. We've covered so much ground from the absolute basics of planning, the money, the timing, the borders,
Through getting around all the transport options, staying safe, the scams to watch for,
to diving into the food, the culture, the etiquette.
and finally exploring centuries of history through those amazing castles, palaces, and all that incredible museum architecture.
Our real hope is that by weaving all of this together, the practical stuff with the richer historical and cultural context, you feel not just like informed, but genuinely inspired for whatever European adventure you might be dreaming up.
Yeah, hopefully it gives you a richer lens through which to see everything.
So think about what stood out most to you. Was it a practical tip, like the free stopovers? Or maybe the idea of trying house sitting? Or perhaps thinking about the story behind a specific building, like the Musée d'Orsay?
There's just so much there waiting to be explored and so many different ways to approach it.